Hi everyone, welcome to the third episode of the B2B eComm Exchange, a Commerce Vision podcast where we discover the stories of B2B e-commerce and beyond from across Australia and New Zealand. My name's Matt Evlampieff. I'm part of the Commerce Vision team here based in New Zealand, and I lead our mobile product line. I spent the last decade working across commerce and automation. Now, if you're new here and you're yet to follow us on LinkedIn, subscribe to our newsletter and be sure to give us a follow to stay in the know. Our producer will shortly put the links in the chat. And with that, allow me to welcome today's guest on our podcast. He's an AI guru, so much so that he describes himself as a futurist, a big advocate for the advancement in technology and business and forward thinking leadership. A keynote presenter and CEO and founder of multiple organizations throughout his career. It's quite the resume, Tim Warren. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much, Matt. Great to meet you, and thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. And just a quick reminder to everyone watching our live feed, feel free to send through any questions you have for Tim, and we'll get through a few of them over the course of the eComm Exchange podcast today. So, Tim, we've got a lot we can cover in today's session, but I think let's just start at the top. In terms of AI at the moment, there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of things happening on LinkedIn. I'd be really keen to understand. There seems to be sort of the need to demystify the AI realm, especially in sort of commerce and B2B. I'm wondering whether you had any thoughts on sort of people's perception or understanding, or maybe clarifying sort of the role of AI within B2B.
Yeah, look, let's start with AI in general. AI is actually really simple. Anyone who overcomplicates it probably doesn't know what they're talking about. There's two types of computing. You've got deterministic computing and you've got probabilistic computing. So, really early on, when computers developed, uh, people were aware of both of these, and we ended up, for various reasons we won't go into, with essentially deterministic computers that are 1, 0, yes or no. They're exact and they're binary. Now, what AI does is, instead of being exact, it's a little bit more fuzzy. So something is better or worse or more or less, or it might be 56% or 17.284%. So AI is essentially embracing probabilistic computing. It's been around since the 1950s, and it's just got to the stage where consumers can actually appreciate what it can do. But people who are, I guess, skilled in the art have been aware of this, and it's just moved out of the, call it, the B2B space into the consumer space. And all of a sudden, when something's cool, what do you know? There's money available. So bring us on to B2B. A lot of businesses have been experimenting and getting very good results with aspects of AI, for instance, called machine learning. And machine learning is just that. You put a whole lot of examples and information into a machine, and you program it well, and you get out some really interesting things that humans couldn't have done, or they couldn't have done in that time frame, right? So machine learning's been around for some time, and I think you'll know that a really good example of machine learning is, for instance, commerce platforms that let you recommend. The classic thing is, most people who buy that thing buy these as well. Machine learning's used for that. It's not just a search, right? It's a And you can tell when something's machine learning. It'll give you different results every time. Whereas a search, something deterministic, will give you the same results every time. But what's happened is it's been branded. AI's been branded, and now all of a sudden it's available to anyone. And I'll tell you what's changed in the last 12 months. Everyone's an expert, which is why I don't call myself an AI guy anymore.
Absolutely. And I think it is so interesting to see that as that level of education increases, at the same time, some of the perceptions around AI also sort of go down some form of track of, it can be very easy to fix our problems with AI. And especially in business these days, we see a lot of people saying, well, look, is there just an AI platform or product that can help us fix these challenges? And certainly what we've noticed is that, and I think Tim, you would be the same, is that often the fundamental issues or underlying challenges in these businesses are overlooked, but it's often very difficult to actually sort of understand what the path to recognizing if you actually need AI in your business or if it can help. And I wondered, given that you've helped many businesses through this process, if there was any sort of three key steps that you would suggest to a business that was looking to understand whether AI did have a place in solving their challenges.
Yeah, it's so funny, and I laughed to myself as you said that. This happens all the time. People have a problem in their business. They talk to me, they give me a call, and they're like, "Hey, Tim, I need some AI." Like, you can just buy some of it or copy and paste some AI in there. And what I say is that most AI is dropped in like cheap hot sauce on a cold pie. It's badly done onto a bad product. And the problem is not the hot sauce. You can't fix it with any sauce, still a cold pie. Right, you've got to fix the pie. What normally happens when you've got a business that's not running well, they're looking for band-aids. And because they're looking for short-term solutions, that's why they're looking for band-aids. Now, if they went back and fixed the fundamental things, then they might not need AI. And then if they did use it, it would make them even better. But you can't fix something, you can't polish, something that's actually fundamentally broken. And I had this example the other day. I have something I offer where I do an hour diving into people's business to work out and give people a recommendation as to how they can apply. And this is a B2B business, how they can apply AI in their business. And I said, you don't need AI. You can't accept it at the moment. You can't use it. What you need to do is hire differently. And that was not the answer they were wanting. They're like, oh no, I just want some AI. Right? So AI is just a tool. If you want a house, you don't go to Bunnings and buy a hammer. You talk to an architect, or you buy one that's pre-designed and you buy it off the plan. But that work's been done. It's Everything here is a strategic question. AI, if it's done in a tactical way, if you do it on top of something that's strategically not strong, it will fail. I guarantee it. In fact, one of the benefits with AI is it can fail fast, but then people get burnt. And I was talking to a call center, well, let's say it's a call center of one of the biggest companies in the country, and I was talking to them about the benefits of being able to build AI into their diagnosis helpline, where people would call up, describe some things, and then they get some solutions. And they said, "Oh no, no, we tried AI back in 2017, 2018. It wasn't very good, so we've cancelled. We're not doing any AI anymore." It's like saying we're not going to use any of that internet stuff because the first Alta Vista page that I looked at had a black background, right? It's stupid, and those people are going to disappear eventually. But what it means, unfortunately, and this is why the prime message that I've got is to leaders. I like to sit there with a board. I like to sit there with the chief executive and I say, hey, there's 3 steps. Fix your organization. To do that, you need to fix your values. And then when you've done that, come back and talk to me and we'll put some AI in. Then it'll work. And then what happens? A few months later, they give me a call and they're like, whoa, this whole fixing the organization thing's harder than I thought. And I'll say, but you're the CEO. It's your job. And then they quit.
Well, we hope not.
No, I was projecting, but I am a futurist.
And it is interesting because I think even with the businesses that we work with too, I think there's certainly still that sort of legacy nature of I've tried something once and it didn't work, and so I'm not going to go back and revisit it. And I think that is still very prevalent in a lot of wholesale distribution and B2B businesses. But I think the second part of that, to your point, is actually understanding what those fundamental challenges are and fixing them, as you said, is a lot harder because often it's not until you dig into those details that you actually find what those problems are. And I thought it was really interesting that you mentioned that one of your key takeouts was to hire better. I was wondering whether you could elaborate a bit more on that because we're talking about AI, but at the same time, I think we're talking about the relationship between AI and people and how important that is and what that actually looks like in the future too.
I talk about AI all the time with people, and I very rarely talk about technology. I very rarely actually talk about AI. I'm talking about people. It's people problems. People make it happen. Right. And in AI, there's a term for it, which is human in the loop. But if the human's faulty, AI is an amplifier, it's a force multiplier. Right. So if you've got someone who's not great in the organization, give them AI, they'll totally wreck it. Right. If you've you imagine this, right? A social media intern, they're well meaning and they put out a couple of tweets, or they're using that new Blue Sky platform. They put a couple of things out. You know what? That wasn't great. Maybe you just stay away from the tools for a bit, put them on a couple of projects, to learn the language. You give them AI that can write 1,000 tweets, they're going to cause brand damage. AI, like most tools, is a force multiplier. Same as a hammer, right? It takes your own force and it drives that nail in much more efficiently than you can do on your own. So, with that, you need to ensure that you've got people who are aligned with a couple of those key things. They need to be, one, open minded. Two, they need to be curious. Sometimes you've got open minded people and they're not curious. So they just sit there and think, what's going to happen? No, you need the people who are going to define what's going to happen. Curious people, they ask the question enough until they actually make the future. And then three, you need people who are going to commit to the journey. So it's all very well to say this thing's going to be really cool in the future. Like just at the moment in New Zealand, we've got bank account checking. So when you do a transfer from bank account A to B, surprise, surprise, only 50 years after they should have done it, it actually checks the bank accounts match now, right? So that's being rolled out essentially this week. And but you need people who are going to adopt it and get on that journey. And there will have been people fighting against little improvements like that. So if you detect that in your organization, and you haven't fixed your values of your organization, you're going to struggle to bring in AI because it will reflect your culture. AI is a cultural mirror. It will amplify what you do in all of the ways that you're not expecting. And once you address, I've got a fundamental value of do the right thing, right? Do the right thing even if no one's looking. You're walking along the road, you see a bit of rubbish, and it's like, I can pick that up and put it in a rubbish bin. If you've got the type of person who leaves their shopping cart in the middle of the car park and doesn't put it away, that's not the person you want in the organization, because when no one's checking on them, they're not helping you. They're transactional, right? And you want these relationship people where they see this is a win, win, win. Everyone, you, me, and all the people we haven't met, our other stakeholders, we can all win from doing this. So again, a non-technical answer to that, which is address the people, address the values that those people work to.
Yeah, really insightful, Tim. I think it springs to mind as well. It's really interesting as you look at the different verticals and the different roles, I suppose, that these AI tools help. One that comes to mind for me at the moment, which is a very hot topic on LinkedIn, is around the prospecting and outbound sort of nature of a sales role. And there's time and time an example of terribly written AI emails or outbound sequences to the point where they're saying, well, how do we actually redefine this market in terms of how you approach a prospect? And it's quite interesting when you talk about it's about the people and enhancing, how people can perform and how people can sort of communicate. And so it's interesting. I don't actually know the answer. Maybe you've got an opinion on where does that line sort of stop? Because it's interesting how you can leverage AI within your personal professional environment, but still be yourself or remain authentic.
A lot of people are, I'll say a couple of rude things. I'll try and offend some people, right? A lot of people are lazy,
Go for
right?
it, Tim.
They're like, oh, come on, we can get AI and then I can just slack around even more. This whole working from home. I call it not working from home. Um, so the people think with AI, I'm doing 5 hours of work a day at the moment. Maybe I can get it down to 3. And so I can stuff around, I can rot in bed for longer or whatever it is. Well, sorry, that's rubbish. Again, it's a people thing. You don't want those people in your organization. So now, what AI can enable you to do is to do the routine parts of your role more efficiently. So, this is the key part. So, you can spend more time with people. And you would know, you've done sales into organizations of all different sizes. The deal is sealed when you meet them, you look them face to face, you shake their hand. You do that once, you've got a completely different connection to that. Hey, we've just reinvented cold email again. I see those every day. I block all those people, by the way. Um, um, in fact, I often get people saying to me on LinkedIn, it's like, Tim, is this really you or is this AI? And it always is me when they ask that question, but I take it as a compliment. It's like, my AI must be really good if it sounds actually like me, because normally it sounds like a really annoying, preppy ChatGPT kid.
Absolutely. There's a lot of complex language rather than a hey, how you going, Tim? I'm a real person, right?
Yeah, totally. And it's overly formatted, and they all. I mean, I had one where I received an email, but not 24 hours before, I'd seen someone bragging on LinkedIn about how they had this email which had amazing rates. But I don't want people to automate that and pretend to be a human. And this is a fundamental thing. Again, you can set this with the values in your organization. Are people trying to pass off one thing as another, which is lying, right? If you're trying to pass off AI as you, that's lying. I don't want to deal with those people. I want to deal with people. Now, if AI has helped find me as being a AI futurist of note for your show, I'm all down with that. And straight away, I kicked it off, with you, and now we're sitting here on this podcast. So uh, that's a people connection. But I'll tell you what, if you've been chasing me with an AI tool, I'd be very evasive. But I'm well down the track here, right? I've been doing this for a long time, and so I've had time to think about it, right? It's just I spend a long time with the problem, and a lot of people are new to AI. And the classic thing is, this week new to AI. They spend the weekend with it. Next week, they're an expert. It's awesome. And I know when I've got Uber drivers, and a guy I know is an engineer trying to recommend to me how to use AI, it's like getting my dentist how to tell me how to invest. I run a mile from that. But I do listen really carefully. And if you get, in the barbecue conversations, when you get people giving you recommendations, do the opposite as a good guide to AI.
Yeah, yeah, indeed. I think it's quite interesting. I wasn't really planning to talk about any of our products per se in terms of the world that we sort of work in Commerce Vision, but you mentioned something really interesting about AI, and it's a recurring theme as we talk, sort of being an aid to spending more time with people. And it's quite interesting because from our perspective, and I'll give you a really simple example, and I know there's changes in New Zealand, especially around some of the way people invoice, but it's really interesting when you use AI to read your invoices and they go into your ERP by way of example, because you've got this whole field of people that know your business really well, know your customers really well, know the products they order, but the majority of time that they spend is actually just keying those in. And so it's really interesting when you can use AI to be able to automate, as you said, those more routine sort of recurring processes and enable those people to not only grow in their role, but ultimately forge those sort of more strong relationships with their customers. So
You bang on.
I wondered sort of if you had any examples of, obviously that's sort of our world, we're here at Commerce Vision, but if you had any examples of other tasks that maybe businesses hadn't thought of, where there are tools available to be able to give their people more people time.
Yeah, I think that advertising and marketing kind of some of the obvious ones where you get to use that um, the generative AI kind of stuff. Then I like to look if everyone's there. That's kind of the front. It's facing the customer. I like to look at the other end of the business. And there was a really good study that came out of the Australian government 2 weeks ago. It was just released. And if people want to look it up, maybe you can put a link in the details, but it's look up for the Australian government co-pilot trial. And they ran it for about 6 months. They didn't give people a whole lot of training, and they just wanted to see how people use it. And people found ways to use it. 85% of people wanted to keep it. They thought it was good. Two-thirds of managers saw improvements in their team. Senior staff got the biggest improvements, which is fundamentally awesome, right? Because those are your most expensive people. If you've got someone on $200,000 a year and you're getting an hour or 2 hours a day more productivity out of them, that's great. Now, this is the next thing. Once you've looked at those and you say to people, what do you want to do with that time? I can pretty much put money on it that the senior people in the organization and the salespeople in an organization, the successful ones, will say, I can spend that with more people. The senior team will say, the chief executive might say, you know what, I can have I can have an extra time. I can just walk around and maybe chat with the chief of marketing, or go and talk to the head of distribution. That'd be great. They'll always use it for people tasks. And then, because they don't do administrative tasks in the daytime anyway, they do those at night when everyone else has gone to bed. Um, and then with the salespeople, the good ones will say, "Oh no, that'll be great. It'll free it up for me to go and talk to my key leads, my key accounts, my key opportunities." It's the same thing for account managers, etc. The successful ones will look to rebalance it to people, and this is key, which is it is a tool that lets us use the tool less. Right. When we used to till the fields by hand, you had a stick, a pointy stick, and you do it all day, and you could do about, you know, 10 square meters. And then we strapped and it would take you 12 hours. And then you strap a couple of pair of oxen to that. And then the one person can do 50 square meters, and they can do it instead of 12 hours, they can do it in 10, and then they spend more time with people. And then you put a tractor on it. It's the same thing, right? And you can do probably 2,000 square meters and in 8 hours and safer. These are tools that let us spend more time with people, and as a result, less time with tools. And I love that. AI is uniquely positioned for that because of its capability to think.
I think that's such a great little snippet there as well, to be able to use tools to spend less time with tools, as funny as it sounds, and it is
It's like
so
dating apps. You get on to get off, right?
very true. Yeah, and it is interesting. I was actually talking to a contact the other day, and they said that up to 50% of their time was spent finding the right organizations to engage with. And, we deal with a lot of B2B wholesalers. And when you think about that and you look at some of the tools out there that aren't so much AI based, but more workflow based and leveraging those tools, like you said, it's really interesting because in those positions, you think, wow, if I had 50% more time to talk to people, to engage with businesses that I can actually work with, what does that do for our business? And I think you sort of talked about it before, but it's almost like a waterfall effect. If the senior leadership team is
Yeah.
able to have those efficiencies and grow, then ultimately the rest of the business should also start to feel those growth
You
patterns.
yeah, you bang on. And the senior team need to model that behavior, right? Now, I don't want them to work crazy hours. I think you get a bit of work-life balance is good. But when someone says to the CEO who's casually leaning on their desk, say, "Oh, no, it's great to be able to chat. I hadn't seen you much until recently," and the CEO can say, "No, that's because I've got Copilot to work on my emails, or I'm using this plugin for X that frees up my time." And I'll tell you what, this is why you need to hire right, because you need to find people who are going to think the best long term for the business, which might be, uh, and I believe that innovation comes from all areas. The senior people need to model the behaviors, but a lot of the ideas are going to come from newer people, especially younger people in an organization where they haven't learnt all the rules yet. That's quite important. I was the first person in school to hand in a printed assignment as opposed to handwritten. So I was given 0 because I hadn't handwritten it, but it wasn't a handwriting assignment. So my school failed, and as far as
Wow.
I'm concerned. Right. Now, they weren't looking at the future. And there's a saying by Dewey, who invented the Dewey Decimal System: if we teach our children with the tools of yesterday, we're failing them for their tomorrow. Right. We need to use the tools that our children are going to use, because most people who are in university today are going to be doing jobs in 5 years that do not yet exist.
Absolutely. And I think it's really interesting, it sounds like you've had sort of a lot of these conversations around these emerging relationships with AI and technology. And I wondered sort of in terms of, the next 1 to 3 years, if we look at where we're at now, how do you see that relationship sort of evolving over the short to medium term?
It's interesting. It's going to be very reliant on regulation and reliant on what people do in the short term with AI. And so, one of the things I talk about is it's really important for good people to use and experiment with AI, because that's training the machine. But I really worry, what if we look What if AI is learning from what's happening in Gaza, from what's happening in Ukraine, and sees that as a model for human behavior? Because that is not pretty, right? I'm not taking sides here. It's just we don't want that kind of thing. So technology can be good or bad. It can enhance anything. It's a hammer, but when you go and buy a hammer, it doesn't come with a sign on it saying "Please don't murder people." But you could be really effective at it. But we don't have to tell most people that. But you give them a new tool, and people go weird and crazy. So now, it's very hard to predict some of these things because of uh, like this chaos theory of it should be pretty simple to work out what's going to happen, but the number of variables that are kicking into this make it very hard. If I had to take a stab at it, I would say that essentially people will accept that AI can be creative and has reached a human level of cognition. And I think I'd say this is not AGI, full general intelligence, but specific topic level intelligence. I'd say we're almost there. It's probably within the next 4 months. From
Wow.
there, the rate that things can improve can be quite dramatic. And I think we will just see AI as this tool that just gets things done. But there will be uniquely human elements that we still look to people for. And we will look, this is a great time to have done an arts degree. I used to go through university. I was doing a science degree. My friends were doing engineering. We used to tease the people who did a BA. We'd say, they've got a master's in bugger all, but a bachelor's in bugger all. But actually, they're really well placed because they understand nuance of humans and connection and, well written literature so they can train the machine. One of the biggest jobs at the moment in AI is writing well for AI to learn from because what ChatGPT is looking at is not that good.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because that level of creativity does, and it is becoming more and more into business. And what we're seeing is that businesses, especially in the commerce space, you've sort of got two camps, I suppose. You've got the let's run effectively and continue to do what we do, and what's got us here will get us there. And then you've got these businesses that really want to be the challenger models that say we want to do something different. And you mentioned a very simple example earlier of both on the customer or consumer and business side, which is shopping, which is being able to actually search for something and get relevant results. And if we can't get those relevant results, what are in there? And we're seeing a lot of people and those offerings change. So I think it's really interesting that you mention about the relationship with AI and that we accept that it does things for us. But then equally, what does that future look like in terms of B2B transactions and consumers, etc.? It becomes quite a big question really on what the future shape of business looks like when a lot of those sort of not barriers, but challenges to be the best are not there anymore.
I think there's one fundamental answer. What does the customer need? It's always the question in all business, right? If there is no customer, there is no business. I think people overemphasize the value of a specific technology and they think, oh, AI, Band-Aid, we can solve this. We can get people to buy more stuff on Black Friday, But if you can't ship it, which is a really basic thing that's been solved, really, logistics has been solved, with all the 3PL type stuff, it's really been solved, right? If you can't get shit out the door, sorry, if you can't get stuff out the door, then it doesn't really matter how much AI Kool-Aid you drink, right? So I think some people will get confused and where um, what to do when there's something confusing. If you've got a vendor, say, sitting in front of you and they're confusing you, end the meeting. Their job is to inspire you to think about your customer and how you can serve them better. If they and I can talk all tech, right? If they're trying to sell you an API and an SDK to ensure, maximum refresh rate on your on your cart totals to ensure that discounts are reflected immediately in real time, that's kind of complicated. How about this? We'll give your customers the best price. That's all it is. All of the other stuff just happens. And like, if you're training, I'll use an example of training for a marathon. It's quite a good thing where you can't just decide on one day to do it. Like, you can run 100 meters. You can do that. You decide to do it. I can go do it. Take me a little while, and then I'd be back on the show, right? We wouldn't even have to stop. Not a marathon. Right. It takes time. But you don't plan the marathon. You train for it step by step, but you don't plan for it by, well, first I'm going to take this step and I'm going to have a 1 meter long stride, and then I'm going to keep my cadence level, at about, 3 per second. And all of that stuff is true. And that stuff will get you to the line. I know, I've done it. But that's not how you get a marathon. You commit to crossing the line.
Absolutely.
Right? That's how you do. And that is the equivalent of discovering the customer need. And I can guarantee you that in about a year, you'll have AI enhanced salespeople who are not very good, and they'll be doing okay. The best salespeople will still be pens and paper. They'll be walking in with a pad and a pencil. And you know what they're going to do? They're going to ask questions and they're going to listen. Those people will become AI enhanced, but you can't fix a broken thing. Like, there's a thing about, I think it was Peter Lynch, famous investor, said, or it could have been Warren Buffett, two of my heroes, said, you could have a great business run by ordinary people. And, it doesn't matter how much they stuff around. If it's a great business, it'll just keep working. A toll bridge. You can have really bad customer service, but they've got to get across the bridge. That's why toll bridges aren't renowned for their customer experience, right?
Well, we
Okay,
hope
but of
AI
course,
might help with that, right, Tim?
yeah, it might do it. So it was reading my number plate this morning, actually. Um, so when you've got a monopoly, you don't need great customer service. When you don't, you do. So you need to fix that thing that's at the bottom. So fix the business. And what's really awesome, I talk to some great retail businesses, for instance. Like, I've had a great time working with, the Glassons brand, big
Yep.
clothing retailer. But if they've got a big retail footprint, they're even bigger online. They're huge online, and they do no advertising. And they got into they got into technology early on, and they just said, we're not a technology company. We give people the clothes they want. So they listen to what people want. They also go and work out what's changing, and they get it to them. They can turn things around in just a few weeks, literally from catwalk to being in the store. And they just use technology as an enabler. It doesn't feature as, oh, we lead with this and we lead with that, but they're always using these amazing tools. They've got an internal tool for them so they can ship things out, they can do their accounting on it, and it's running on an app on all of the managers' phones. The store manager can see all of the stats live for the whole country, and that's no
Wow.
different to running a 3PL warehouse or something like that. All of that can be done, but you go to their website, they're a clothing brand, and they just happen to have some of the best technology I've worked with. So when I implemented my solution with them, it took about 7 days because everything I said, oh, have you got an API? Yep. I'll tell you what, we'll give you a special one so then they can track everything that goes through there. And then I needed some changes, something added. A couple of days it was all done. Why? Modern technology stack. They had, a really good e-commerce platform they were running on, not yours, but a very good one. But they'd done a good job because they want to serve the customer. And when I hear people talk and the customer isn't in the picture, then they're not in the room. They're not going to be on the P&L. And there's one place the customer really belongs is both in your shop or on the end of the phone, but at the top of the P&L, right? You can't do anything without a customer, so you got to listen to them.
Absolutely. And I think that has so many sort of parallels with the B2B space, more so in terms of understanding your buyer. And I think you actually had quite an interesting post on LinkedIn that we were chatting on recently that really, shows the importance of understanding the buyer because, like you said, as AI tools become more and more prevalent in the market and there's homogenous products, it's going to be about the relationship in terms of how people want to interact with you. And you say there's an ordinary salesperson that could do quite well, and there's a great salesperson that can have excellent performance. But I think the fundamental understanding of how a buyer wants to buy or interact, and whether that be, as you said, online, in person, um, is this just an automatic, min max reorder volume, but we just know that the stock arrives the first thing in the morning? It's really interesting to think about that as we go down this route of AI within business, to really align these outcomes to how buyers want to interact with us as well.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of things in there that we can pick up on if we've got time. But I think you hit on actually one of the best things, and this is always as a new entrant into the space, as a kind of a challenger brand. We were always trying to encourage the concept that customers actually tell you how they want to connect. So you need to give them the choice. Like you go to the supermarket, they don't just have one brand of something. You go to a boutique store, they might just have, one brand of something that's probably really good. It'll have a high margin on it. It's probably really good. But you go to the supermarket, you rock into Coles or Woolworths or something like that, and will blow me down if they don't have 7 different types of carrot, right? Or you go for apples, and these apples are branded now, right? And I mentioned earlier that one of the bad things that happened for AI about a year ago was it suddenly became branded. And this is what caught people like me off. All of a sudden you had ChatGPT. These tools weren't new. We've been using them for a while. But back to that customer choice. When you give the customer the choice of the channel that they use to interact with, you're doing the right thing for the customer. And it's quite interesting. If you ask a customer uh, what is their favorite method of communication, they just tend to list the last one where they had a good experience. So anyone who's done market research that knows the value of unprompted versus prompted. So unprompted, I can list about 4 banks in Australia. Prompted, I know about 20 of them, right? It's like, oh yeah, I remember that. Bank of
Yeah.
Queensland. Or, whatever it is, right? Um, but giving people choice, and then it might take people a year to move into a channel. And I've had this kind of feedback. Wow, I used the automated chat. It was incredible. It's all I'm going to use now. Equally, I had some people swearing at it, saying, this is the worst piece of nonsense I've ever used. But you know what? We've given people choice, and they can make a decision, and that person can send in a fax if they want. Although that's quite a good example. Do you know that the NHS in England, uh, they were the biggest purchaser of fax machines of all time? They only
Wow.
stopped using them last year. They did eventually have to wean people off it. But what they were doing is they were just trying to close channels. They weren't opening new ones. So what they should have had was a phone, just an app, an NHS app. It'd be hugely used. Imagine chatting to a doctor, getting diagnosed online, this kind of thing. This is all there, and it's all been possible not just recently, but stuff's been possible for 8 years at least. And I know that in Australia there are amazing moves afoot to put essentially healthcare in the outback by giving people really high quality healthcare through their phone, quick diagnosis. And then if they're having a heart attack, you can get the flying doctor service out there because Australia's, I heard it's quite big. Right. So it's not like you can just drive into town if you're, way up in the back of nowhere. So that's the kind of thing I get excited about. And it's the same in the B2B world. If you can give your customers choice and say, look, we're going to be experimenting with these channels. We're going to, because an API is just a channel. We're going to provide APIs. We're going to provide a chatbot that you can rebrand. We're going to provide this kind of a service and an app, a white label app. Um, People might say, "Oh, that sounds great. I don't think I need any of that." But tell me about that app. It doesn't mean that the other ones are a waste of time and money. It just means that you've met a customer need. When you go to a restaurant, it doesn't have one thing on it. You have a menu. It's not a failure. It's not redundancy to have, steak and the chicken on the menu if they only order the steak.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting because I think over the past couple of years, there's been this real sort of push for the omni-channel approach in business, yet little, there isn't that many people that have actually managed to achieve that true omni-channel strategy. Whereas now you're actually really starting to see that come through. And I think to your point earlier, you can have multiple buyers in a business, and a warehouse manager versus a sales manager versus a sales rep or whoever roles in the business all might want to have a different channel based on their needs, how they work, their capacity and their resource. And up until now, I don't have time to jump on the phone, but hey, if I can send a text and get my order in, perfect. So it's really interesting to see businesses starting to recognize that and the true power and growth opportunity of being able to give that choice that you mentioned.
Absolutely, and you mentioned different people, different buyers, and this is the thing, um, omni-channel. I'll come back to that one. A lot of discussion about it. I think it was the first time for a lot of businesses that the customer started to come into the picture. But I prefer instead of omni-channel, I prefer customer centric because very few businesses have been customer centric. What they have been is business centric. So they say, "I'll tell you what, I know someone at Telstra. We should get some phones." It's a pretty easy one, isn't it? It's pretty easy to do that. Yeah, let's get some phones. And then you tell everyone. It's like phone banking. Remember when that came out? It was a little while, probably before your time, actually. Everyone turned on phone banking. Now you don't have to use it. And I'll tell you what, my parents still use phone banking. I think they're the only people in the country who still do. Uh, but then along comes a website and you had to have this, and then along comes an app and you had to have an app. And you look at the marginal cost of these things. The first banking apps came out and they cost about 2 million bucks. And then about 5 years later, they cost about 200,000. About 5 years after that, they cost about 20,000. And now you can go to AI, and in about 2 hours, you can get it to write an app for you or a website for you. It's unbelievable. It's absolutely sensational.
It's the power of AI and where it's going. I think we've touched on so much today with the possibilities of where it can go. And I think what's been really great within the conversation we've had so far is to be able to, I guess, break down some of those barriers because some of these things can be daunting, whether it be in business, whether it be personally, and how you leverage these tools or have a relationship with something that is evolving so rapidly and exponentially that it's hard to keep up in some ways. But I think really today to sort of recap a little bit. Maybe if we just touch back on loop background to the start of the conversation and demystifying AI a little bit, Tim, it would be great to give our listeners sort of one last definition of, in your terms, sort of for any businesses or people that are looking to leverage AI or learn more about it, what your advice to them would be, as in where do you even start?
Yeah, well, you've got to start making sure that you've got the right people in the organization. They need to be open-minded, curious, and action-oriented. Those are the three things that really stand out there. Again, finding those right people, and it can take a long time to reorganize an organization, right? It can take a year, but if you don't do it, you're just kicking the can down the road while you're on fire, right? Why not pick the can up and put the fire out? So I talk about this concept of humane, HUMAIN, right? Bit of a play on words, but the idea is that it's human AI co-evolution from this point forward. It is sensational. I use AI many times a day in my role, and sure, I'm an AI guy, but everyone else is as well who's at the leading edge. I presented this morning and I asked the room of about 400 people, how many people use AI daily in their job? I think about 60% of people put their hand up, right? So we are changing the way we evolve our thinking and our work and our jobs and our families. So it's the right people, open minded, curious, and action oriented.
Unreal. Now, Tim, if it's okay, we've had a great chat so far, and I know your time is running out shortly here. So I wondered, as part of sort of this podcast, what we typically do is we'll get our guest to leave a question for the following guest. So I've actually got a question from last time from our guest, Kate. So I wondered whether I could pose that to you, Tim, and then once you've answered, you might be able to pose a question for our next guest that jumps on the podcast.
Yeah, let's do it. I know
Awesome. So
Kate, by the way.
Oh, there you go. Well, do you know how to say her surname? Because I was
No,
going to try and
no,
pronounce
it's
it
a
as Kate
complete mystery.
Miss
Kate M.
Misla. So apologies if I've pronounced that wrong. Kate M. Now, her question here is,
Yeah, I think probably for me, yeah, one around data. So data's, the new gold now, right? Everybody has all this data and all this information and often, and I think particularly in the world of digital and e-com, but they don't really know what to do to it. So I think my question would be around where should a business start with a data strategy? What's important to review, what's important to collect, how do you get the best out of that? And I guess how can technology and e-commerce tools in particular help enable a good data strategy and good outcomes of within that data space? That's kind of like seven questions in one, I think.
it's quite a few
Good
questions.
ques Yeah, good question. There's about 100 questions in there. I would say, with data, I'm a futurist, so I always live in the future. I was having these discussions with people in, say, 2011 to 2013 and helping people work on data strategies. Now, a lot of these businesses were financial services companies, and they have a massive amount of data going back to the beginning of markets, right? And I think the same guidance applies today. There is a settled data strategy around how to approach this. You need people in your organization who are data custodians, people who look after the data. It doesn't belong to them. They're looking after it. You need to understand personally who owns the data, which is pretty well settled in New Zealand, Australia, which are leaders in this area. The data belongs to the person that generated it, right? So, all of these words that I'm using now, you can broadcast it, you can do that, but it's my words, right? So, understanding that. Now, uh, there's a whole range of putting data strategy in. It's best done with people that know what they're doing. But when you're dealing with a pricing platform provider or uh, product platform management, those kind of tools, they're really well aware of this, and they get these things called data lakes, which are just large collections of data stored typically in original format, and then around the outside you wrap the intelligence, and that gives you usable data that you can query. AI is sensational for doing this. So there are roles. This is a settled area of data theory. There are roles defined around it. I think retail's just waking up to it now because we're generating more data in a day now than we probably were in a year 50 years ago. You think of how many photos you take at 20 megs each, right? So this is a long question, isn't it? In regards to e-commerce tools, um, the ones that are very archaic, you're going to struggle with. If you're, I know there's people, there's retailers still around using COBOL from the 60s and 70s, right? You're going to need to move on to a new stack. And AI is useless until you do that. AI don't want to talk to COBOL. It can actually write COBOL, but it doesn't want to. We've had words about this. So this needs to be again ingrained in the organization at the topmost level. The CEO and board need to be on board with a modern data strategy, and it will speed the business up. Simply like from logistics perspective of pulling out, 100 megs of information out of an old database versus a new one, which might be your next EDM campaign to sell whatever it is you're selling, or to contact your suppliers or your vendors, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
You need to have that on hand. But yes, there's a science around this, and don't leave it up to chance.
Awesome. I think that's a good answer. It was a very comprehensive question, so you've done well to get through each of those points. So, with that, now it's your turn to pose a question to our next guest.
Okay, mine's fundamentally different. I am interested to know what motivated them to drive them towards success.
Unreal. Well, I look forward to the the next guest's answer on that one. And with that, Tim, that sort of brings us to the end of today's episode. So, a big thank you again for joining us. I think this has been another great episode. We've covered a lot of ground and probably more than we expected to, which is always cool. So, look, we'll be sure to add your LinkedIn in the chat. But before you go, if you wanted to let everyone know sort of what you've got on and how's best to connect with you if they want to learn more about what you do in the AI space, yeah, let us know.
All good. Thanks for that. I won't go on for too long. But yeah, so I'm a long term, I've been working with AI for a long time. There's a lot of people who've been in it a hot minute, as it were. And as you probably noticed that I tend to rubbish a few things because I hear so many brandly new minted experts. But I'll give people an honest opinion. The way I love to connect is through LinkedIn. I'm like a LinkedIn superstar according to LinkedIn. I've reached
Yeah.
so many connections that they don't even want me to they don't even let me have access to all the functions anymore, but I can accept incoming connections. I'd love listeners of this podcast to at least follow, or if you think we've got something to discuss, find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty easy. I'm LinkedIn famous. Find me on there and connect and send me your questions, because usually I get really interesting questions and a lot of the time I answer them in public, so I won't attribute them, but I'll put it up as a LinkedIn post. And this is where I get a lot of my ideas. I listen to my customers, and that's what I do. So I consult in the area of AI strategy, but my favorite thing to do in this area is to jump up on stage and present. So I'm an AI presenter. I've been doing it from before it was cool, and I'd love to do it for your listeners.
Unreal. All right, Tim. Well, look, thank you again for your time. We'll definitely be circling back next season to see what the state of B2B is and as it continues to evolve. And thank you again for everyone who's taken the time to join us on today's podcast.
Thanks, Matt.
Awesome. See you later.
See ya.